They thought cutting off his nose would make him unfit to rule forever, rendering him a literal monster in the eyes of God. Yet, against every law of the Byzantine Empire, Justinian II fashioned a golden nose, raised a barbarian army, reclaimed his throne through pure, unadulterated bloodlust. This is history's most terrifying comeback story. The boy who would become Justinian II was born into an empire that had learned to survive by narrowing its options. He was the son of Constantine IV, crowned co-emperor as a child in a palace where legitimacy was manufactured in public and policed in private. In Constantinople, being born purple was less a blessing than a countdown. The army expected victories, the capital expected stability, the church expected obedience, and every faction expected access. By the time Justinian inherited sole rule in 685, the empire's enemies had learned a painful truth. Byzantium could lose provinces and still endure, but the people of the court had learned another. An emperor could be replaced faster than a frontier could be repaired. Conventional history paints Justinian as a young autocrat who mistook cruelty for strength. The sources, often written by men who survived him, give real evidence for that. He elevated favorites like Stephen the Persian, a minister whose authority could be felt. In the guarded rooms where petitions died and taxes were calculated, Justinian pushed hard against the aristocracy and the urban elites of the capital. Not because he didn't understand them, but because he did. Every concession looked like weakness. Every compromise invited a rival in a system where armies proclaimed emperors. The first danger was always internal. Generals who believed they could do better and crowds who could be turned into a weapon with bread, rumor, and a name. His early victories briefly made him look unstoppable. In 688 to 689, he campaigned in the Balkans against Slavic groups and forced a new deal with the Umayyad Caliphate. He wanted something older emperors had lost, the ability to set terms instead of merely surviving them. But those victories did something psychologically dangerous. They convinced him that the empire could be re-engineered by force, and that the people he needed most would submit if he pressed hard enough. That is where money enters the story, not as background, but as the empire's pressure gauge. Byzantine finances were not simply numbers. They were consent written into ledgers. The state needed predictable tax, land that could be assessed, and soldiers who could be paid. In an empire of fortified cities and long coasts, a stable gold currency, the solidus was more than a coin. It was credibility. The solidus was accepted because it was reliable, and it was reliable because emperors feared what happened when it wasn't. Justinian inherited that delicate machine while also inheriting a new structural reality. The Umayyad Caliphate to the east was no longer a raiding confederation. It was an expanding state, hungry for revenue, garrisons, and a monopoly on legitimacy. The balance between Constantinople and Damascus was a cold war of raids, treaties, and controlled humiliation. The frontier bled every year, but the empires also traded, exchanged prisoners, and negotiated payments when neither could risk a full collapse. In this tense equilibrium, the solidus traveled across borders. It paid ransoms, bought grain, funded mercenaries, and crossed into Umayyad markets because people trusted its weight and purity. Roman gold carried Roman prestige even in enemy hands, and that was the problem. For Justinian, every solidus circulating in the caliphate was a quiet confession that Rome still set the standard. He decided to turn that standard into a trap. Sometime in the 690s, Justinian ordered a redesign of the empire's gold coinage that broke with centuries of restraint. In place of an emperor's portrait alone, the coin now carried an icon of Christ, frontal, authoritative, paired with an imperial image on the other side. The message was not subtle and it was not decorative. It was a claim that Roman legitimacy was not merely political, it was cosmic. Christ was stamped as King of Kings, and by implication the emperor ruled as his agent. A coin passed hand to hand, a proclamation could be ignored. Justinian put theology into the market. The decision forced new calculations in Damascus. Umayyad policy toward images was complex and evolving, and later Islamic tradition would treat figural representation with deep suspicion. The sources suggest a tightening attitude in this period, especially when images signaled rival sovereignty. Here, the history is debated, not because the stakes were small, but because they were enormous. Some scholars emphasize religious offense as the key driver. Others stress statecraft, arguing Abd al-Malik's core fear was political dependency on Roman monetary dominance. Both pressures could be true at once. What matters is that Justinian's coin made acceptance costly. To let that gold circulate unchallenged risked teaching subjects that Christian power defined value itself. Caliph Abd al-Malik, already consolidating a civil war-scarred caliphate, faced a cornered decision. He could accept the coins and swallow the symbolic poison, or he could reject them and gamble the economy in wartime. Refusal might disrupt trade, pay, and tax collection. Acceptance might weaken the caliph's legitimacy against rivals who already accused him of compromise. Justinian's bet was that Abd al-Malik could not afford disruption. Abd al-Malik answered with a revolution. The caliphate began issuing a new gold dinar, stripped of human images and packed with text, Quranic declarations, proclamations of divine unity, and the prophet's message. It was not merely an economic instrument. It was a statement that the Islamic State did not need Roman faces or Roman gold to define legitimacy. Where Rome put a sacred image in the market, Damascus put sacred words. The shift was a new visual identity for the Islamic world, designed to travel farther than any army and to survive any single ruler. But it was a risk. A currency wins only if people believe in it. Abd al-Malik had to enforce trust by law, by taxation, and by the hard power of garrisons. The caliphate's move was also a confession. Justinian's provocation had struck a nerve. Now, two empires were not only raiding borders, they were competing to define reality through money. Each coin that changed hands asked a question: who is sovereign here? Justinian did not stop at coinage. He tried to reshape the empire's human geography, because soldiers and taxpayers were not abstract. They lived in villages that could be burned, moved, or compelled. In the Balkans, he launched campaigns that captured large numbers of Slavs and other groups, tens of thousands by later accounts, and relocated them across the sea into Asia Minor, especially Bithynia. This was not simple cruelty. It was a strategic calculation. To place a mass of new military manpower near Constantinople, close enough to deploy quickly, and to use them as a human buffer against raids from the east. A transport of people is a transport of risk. The moment these settlers disembarked, the empire created a new class of free, land-holding peasant soldiers whose loyalty was untested. Justinian needed them to be grateful and obedient. The traditional elites feared them as a demographic weapon. To arm newcomers was to threaten old networks. To fail to arm them was to waste the entire operation. The structural constraint was brutal. Byzantium's manpower pool was limited, and the frontier demanded bodies. Justinian's solution was forced migration at scale. He pushed the logic further with Cyprus. The island sat in the contested zone between the two powers, valuable as a naval base and as a source of revenue. Under a previous arrangement, Cyprus had been shared in an uneasy condominium, its tax revenue divided to prevent either empire from using it as a dagger. Justinian wanted that dagger in his hand or in no one's. He reportedly ordered much of the Cypriot population moved to the mainland, and a new settlement founded, Nea Justinianopolis, to control maritime approaches and deny the caliphate easy resources. Whether the numbers are exaggerated or not, the intent is clear. Starve the enemy's logistics by uprooting civilians. That decision created diplomatic friction with the Umayyads and deep anxiety among Byzantines who watched the emperor treat subjects like cargo. Moving an island's people is an admission that you cannot hold the island securely. It signals weakness even as it tries to manufacture strength. Every forced relocation produced immediate human suffering and long-term political hatred. And hatred was the one resource the capital always had in abundance. By 695, hatred found a lever. The empire's military and bureaucratic elites, those who collected taxes, commanded troops, and endured the emperor's punishments, had reasons to fear him. Justinian's fiscal pressure, his harsh justice, and his reliance on intimidating ministers created a coalition of the threatened. In Constantinople, revolt was not simply a mob event. It was an elite decision to let the mob act. The usurper Leontios, a general with credibility among soldiers, became the vessel for a broader calculation. It was safer to gamble on a new emperor than to remain under one who treated everyone as a suspect. Justinian was seized. In a guarded space where power could be performed, he was mutilated, his nose cut off, then exiled to Cherson in Crimea rather than executed. The mutilation was a political technology. In Byzantine political culture, physical wholeness was tied to imperial fitness. Disfigurement was meant to make restoration unthinkable. Killing him risked martyrdom and revenge from loyalists. Sparing him without mutilation risked his return. They chose a middle path: keep him alive, but mark him as unfit, and let distance finish the job. They misjudged the psychology of a man who had grown up believing he was Rome. In exile, Justinian lived with the constant humiliation of being watched. Cherson was far, but not far enough. It was a place where imperial agents could reach and where local elites played their own games between Byzantium and the steppe. Justinian's options were constrained by geography and by the fact that he was valuable as a bargaining chip. He tried to escape, was betrayed, escaped again. The sources dramatize these episodes, and some details are uncertain. But the structure is consistent. Every local leader feared being on the wrong side if he returned, and feared being punished if he didn't. Justinian went to the Khazars, married into their ruling house, and gained temporary shelter. But shelter is not power. When Constantinople pressured the Khazars to hand him over, he fled again, this time to the Bulgars under Khan Tervel. Here, another structural reality shaped his comeback. The empire's borders were porous to ambitious outsiders, and barbarians could become kingmakers. Justinian offered Tervel titles: gold, legitimacy, whatever currency he still had, because he needed an army more than he needed dignity. In 705, Justinian returned to Constantinople with Bulgar support and a hardened band of followers. The city's walls were designed to stop sieges, not subterfuge, and the stories emphasize infiltration, a small group entering through an aqueduct or a weak point, opening gates, triggering panic. Whether every detail is exact, the decisive fact is not. Justinian got inside, and inside the city, perception was reality. Once a claimant stood in the capital with armed men, the question became immediate: who will die resisting and who will live by switching sides? The comeback was not a restoration, it was a purge. Justinian's second reign was driven by a need to punish that exceeded rational consolidation. He staged public executions to signal that the rules were now personal. He hunted rivals, humiliated enemies, and ruled as a man trying to erase the memory of his own mutilation by mutilating the body politic. The golden nose, if worn consistently or symbolically in key appearances, was not vanity. It was a defiant argument. Legitimacy could be forged, literally, and the empire would accept what fear compelled it to accept. But fear has a shelf life. The same mechanisms that removed him before, military allegiance, elite conspiracy, urban unrest, remained. Worse, his policies created new enemies and exhausted old supporters. The Slavic troops he had relocated earlier had already proven unreliable. Sources report that many defected to the Arabs during a campaign, a catastrophic betrayal that would have confirmed every elite fear about his demographic experiments. On the frontier, the Umayyads remained relentless. At home, the memory of his revenge created a coalition united not by ambition but by survival. By 711, revolt returned, led by Philippikos Bardanes. Justinian was away from the capital, and that absence was fatal. In Constantinople, the decisive chamber was not a battlefield, but the space where the city's forces, guards, factions, officials, agreed to treat him as already gone. Justinian tried to respond, but the empire's structure punished delay. Once the capital accepted a new name, provincial loyalty collapsed quickly. Justinian was captured and killed. His young son was also murdered, extinguishing his line. The mutilation that had failed to prevent his return did not save him from the final rule of Byzantine politics. Legitimacy is real only while it is defended. The conventional lesson is that cruelty breeds downfall. The deeper lesson is more unsettling. Justinian's reigns show an empire trapped between symbolic legitimacy and material constraint, between coins and armies, between population and taxation, between theological claims and frontier realities. His most famous act, stamping Christ onto gold, helped provoke the caliphate into creating a new monetary identity that would outlast both men. His forced migrations reveal a state trying to manufacture loyal manpower and instead creating instability it could not fully control. His mutilation and comeback expose how Byzantine politics treated the emperor's body as a public instrument, then learned too late that instruments can be replaced. After Justinian II, Byzantium did not become gentler. It became more cautious in how it staged power. The empire would continue to survive by adapting institutions. Theme armies, fiscal reforms, negotiated frontiers, rather than wagering everything on a single ruler's will. In the Islamic world, Abd al-Malik's coinage reform helped standardize a visual and economic language of empire that traveled across continents. Two rival states had tried to force each other into submission through symbols, and both succeeded in one sense. They made the conflict structural. Long after Justinian's golden nose was buried, the question his coin asked, who defines legitimacy? Who defines value, kept circulating, stamped into metal, carried in purses, and enforced by the men with swords standing